Major story in the News Corporation papers today that lots of parents would be very interested in. Now, the country's wealthiest schools have been revealed. Now, this is fee-paying schools. Remarkably, the top 5 in several states are shown to have more money than the bottom 300 combined. Now, what this will do, I think, will reignite the age-old debate about fee-paying schools and how much federal money per student they should receive. Now, as the father of 2 girls who attended a private school in Melbourne, a couple of things. Parents of students in private education pay income tax, so I've got no problem with some of that tax coming back to non-government schools, particularly when I was paying those eye-watering fees. Many parents, less well off than I was, though, they scrimp and save to get their children into private education. Just think about fee-paying Catholic education, for example. Without a government contribution, those fees would be even higher, and many of those children, I imagine, would end up back in the state system. But, and it's a big but, I am uncomfortable when I see those same schools building extravagant sports complexes, installing upmarket cafes for students, funding expensive overseas trips. Joining me now is News Corp's education editor, Susie O'Brien. Great to see you again. We seem to circle around this debate, Susie, every couple of months about this debate about whether these schools should in fact receive any government money. What do you make of that?
Well, the News Corp papers around the country today have shown just how vast the gulf is between public and private schooling. In Victoria, the wealthiest school is Haileybury, $677 million over 5 years of income, and that is more than the 200 poorest schools combined. I mean, you have to say, however you look at this, something is seriously out of whack.
Yeah, and the fees to go to Haileybury would be eye-watering. I think I read today in the Herald Sun that it's something like $37,000, Susie, for a Year 12 student. If I think back to the checks I was writing when my girls were at school about 8 or 10 years ago, it wasn't $35,000, thank God, but it was a substantial income. I guess most of that money that the News Limited papers report, you got Brisbane Grammar, the most expensive in Brisbane, and you've got St Peter's College in Adelaide, which I know well as well. Most of that money comes from the fees that the parents are prepared to pay, right? That's not a lot of government money.
Well, what is actually quite astounding is that Haileybury, for example, each kid gets about $35,000 a year in funding. 8,000 of that comes from federal and state governments. Federal and state taxpayers are propping up a wealthy school like Haileybury, to the tune of $8,000 per student, and there's about 4,000 students. And the same goes for most of those massive schools. $4,000 at Knox, $7,000 at Sydney Grammar. You've got enormous amounts of government money that are propping up these schools. And you know what? If these schools needed the money, they should get it. But these are schools with untold wealth, with, equestrian centres and polo fields and indoor aquatic centres. It's actually getting to the point. Caulfield Grammar in Melbourne the other year spent $100 million on a wellness and relaxation lifestyle learning centre. I think they're actually running out of things to spend this money on. And meanwhile, there's a whole host of state schools. We did a story about 6 months ago about Sunshine College in Melbourne that has got so little money that half their facilities are closed down because the ceiling's falling down, there's mould in the bathrooms, the Bunsen burners don't work. They're getting $20,000 per student a year, well under $35,000 at Haileybury or anywhere else.
Is my memory right that a government, I can't remember whether it was the former Morrison-Turnbull-Abbott coalition government or whether it was a Labor government, they were not thinking about means testing this via the postcode of where the school was located? Did that ever happen?
Well, it used to be done by postcode, and one of the things that came in under Gonski was they changed it to be based on parental income, and this is completely if this is properly implemented by the Labor government, it will change the whole funding landscape. So there's something called the SRS, and it's the School Resource Allocation. And so what it's found is that there's a whole heap, like hundreds and hundreds of private schools that are well over-resourced, that parents can afford to pay, that parents are willing to pay, and these schools are still being propped up hugely by the taxpayers. So what we are going to see, if the government goes through with these Gonski reforms, we're still talking about 10 years down the track, if they go through with these reforms, we're going to see a massive shake-up. And there will be a whole host of private schools that will be getting less and state schools that will be getting more. That's if they go ahead with it.